In this video, we'll discuss the features on Carl Jung's face that pointed to deep introspection and a capacity for the exploration of the mind and consciousness. Enjoy. Hey everybody. A subscriber had suggested Carl Jung recently. I think last week they suggested I read Carl Jung. Great suggestion and a reading I'm looking forward to. I've always been a Jungian at heart. So if you don't know the history of Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists of all time, and was actually a student of Sigmund Freud for a period of time, and they had a very real falling out, and Carl Jung kind of felt betrayed by Freud, I think, given how close they were. But Freud was very analytical and really had a kind of an inkling that everything derived to sexual urges, and I'm really oversimplifying his approach, but Jung was about the collective unconscious and the symbolic nature of dreams, and I, for one, operate much more from a Jungian philosophy in my life, and his work has really helped me. And I've used his work in my face reading. And quick little side note too, because I'm kind of a nerd for Jung, the archetypes which he discussed, the kind of symbolic representations and caricatures that we take on, the warrior, the healer, you can look it up. That was all derived from his study of Eastern philosophy, specifically something called the I Ching, which is essentially the Taoist Bible of sorts that relates to the eight hexagrams, which can be extrapolated into 64 nodes of change. That's a deep esoteric conversation, which we're not going to get into right now, but he was very deeply influenced by these things, and Carl Jung is just a fascinating character. I think one of the greatest minds of all time. He's up there with Da Vinci and Tesla and those kinds of guys. And I think he was, in my opinion, sort of one of the first recognized Western shamans. And when I say recognized, I mean that's kind of in the subculture. People don't think of him as a shaman, but the way he thought about things and the way he thought about dream time, very shamanistic, very fascinating character. So, in any case, let's talk about Carl Jung's face. I wasn't able to find a ton of photos given the time that he was alive. And so I only have 6 primary photos, but there's plenty to work with here. And I want to talk about the key features, the things that really stand out. And moreover, the larger picture and idea behind face reading, the story that your face tells. When we're doing face reading, if you're face reading or if I'm face reading someone, when I look at someone's face, I can say, well, these features mean this about him. This is how he operated. This is what he did. And it's like, that's cool, great. But these things he likely knew about himself. So by looking at someone and telling people what they already know about themselves, isn't that revolutionary? The whole point of face reading is the invitation into, are you living these things? Are you living the topography of your face? Because if you are, the East says, you're going to live longer. You're fulfilling the role. You can call it fate. You can call it destiny. You can call it all these things. You can call it form and function. But the larger idea is the face reader, what I'm doing with face reading, when I'm offering it to my clients, and if any of you want a face reading, please reach out, go to omnihealthandlifestyle.com, message me in my contact section, and we can set something up. But the whole point is for me to ask you, here's what the features say. You likely know these things about you, and in what capacity are you living these things? If you're living these things, you're on the right track, and you are nourishing life force and fulfilling the principles of what they call yang sheng, which translates as life nourishment. It's the opposite of disease management. The thinking is that disease sets into the body if we are not living our facial features and we're not living into the capacity of who and what we are. So, Carl Jung, the first thing I was drawn to were his forehead lines. Really interesting forehead lines. So they're auspicious in the sense that forehead lines, when they are connected, when they're cohesive, when the lines connect, what that points to is cohesiveness of thought. It shows an aptitude in the mental sphere, a capacity for computing. It can be analytical or abstract, but there's a uniformity and a congruency in how the mind operates. So with wrinkles like this, I would argue he's got a sharp mind. Was he using it? Absolutely. He definitely was in his work. But what's also interesting about his forehead lines is that he's got 3 primary connected wrinkles. So anytime we see odd numbers, okay, 2 is an even number, 3 is odd, and so on and so forth. 3 relates to yang. It relates to expansion, growth, and the yang energies, the masculine. even numbers relate to the feminine and relate to just the opposite. So 3 connected lines, okay? And yes, there's a lot of numerology in the East and a lot of systems in the world talk about this, but the power of 3, the power of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Jing, Qi, Shen. The Trinity shows up a lot in human symbolism. 3 primary lines, that's auspicious in the sense of like the power of 3 in the mind. He was also deeply God-driven, so I couldn't help but think about the Trinity and that nature. But he's also got these dips, and they're all connected. And they sort of point down. And so anytime we see angularity, that's a symbol for fire. And it's also a sign for action and movement. So there was something action-oriented and driven about his mind. And again, if I had ever worked with Carl Jung, I'd be asking him about these things and saying, what do you do, first of all? And are you using your mind in that directive, action-oriented capacity? And given the breadth of his work and what he did in his lifetime, I would say absolutely he did. And he was living his features. So that's fascinating. Big, broad, open forehead. And that relates to the mind. And Carl Jung definitely was a student of the mind. Now, what I also found interesting in relation to his forehead was the temples here. So if you look at the shadow here, he also had a very big, I want to say tempular, I don't think that's a word, but the temple area here, this geography, like big, broad, and kind of deep. And when we see that, this area, okay, when it's hollowed, there's a desire for altered states of consciousness. Now, altered states of consciousness can come from sex, it can come from drugs, it can come from, and when I say drugs, I mean, good and bad, technically, how you want to classify those, but things like psychedelics or the overuse of hard drugs, things that can actually hurt and damage you. But when we see that hollowed out, there's a desire for altered states. It can come in the form of pursuing alcohol. So you have to be careful with this feature. But I think on Carl Jung, the altered states of consciousness, he was huge into dream time and the analyzation of what the symbols in our dreams meant and how many of us dream the same symbols when we are going through certain things. So he had a body of work that is exhaustive. It's huge. It's massive. It's a whole universe. But one of the things that really got him into this collective unconscious idea was this congruency he was seeing with his patients. When he would talk to people and when they would have a death of someone close to them, he started to notice that many people started to have the same symbols showing up in their dreams. And there was someone famous that died during his time, and I can't remember who it was, but they all had these dreams of a giant ship sinking into the ocean with tumultuous waters. And he started to think that maybe these symbols are sort of like these larger constructs that we all share, like a mental field that we all project into. And if you read about metaphysics and Eastern philosophy and dreamtime, all of that stuff is about where our mind goes and the shared consciousness that we all connect to, sort of this large universal consciousness web. Fascinating stuff. So he developed a lot of things like that. So he's got a fascinating forehead. Now on the forehead, what I also noticed was as he got older, his eyebrows became incredibly sparse, just a few straggler, wild kind of hairs showing there. And when we see that, that's an overuse of wood usually. So when the eyebrows start to fade and go away, there's usually an overuse of the drive and the push. And I'm guessing Carl Jung probably pushed very hard. And from what I remember reading about him, he also had a very strong drive during his working years that was very depleting to him. And I think part of that was emotional, part of that was physical, but there was something kind of obsessive about his pursuit of the mind. And in that wood, that drive, that vigor, that push, how we pursue our dreams. In his case, metaphorically and physically, the pursuing of our dream time, but also the things that we're trying to accomplish. The eyebrows can take a hit. It's an overuse of wood. So it looks like he used quite a bit of his wood. Now, in looking at his nose, he had a very dominant nose. And from his youth, you can see in this picture, compared to older age, our noses continue to grow, and his nose became more beaked and more sharp and more dominant. But that is the midlife anchor. And so I didn't do a deep dive into his 40s, which is what the nose represents, but I would like to know. But with a dominant nose like that, there's also usually a strong relationship with the ego. You have to be careful if the nose is too dominant. My nose runs like this a little bit too. You can kind of see I have a dominant nose. When you look at me, I've got kind of a beaked nose. It shows up. And one of the things I've had to pay attention to in my life is not to be too egoic. And that doesn't mean self-absorbed completely or, always thinking about yourself, but it means that the nature and dynamics of the ego are very relevant. But having a healthy, strong ego is a very good thing, but you have to learn how to temper it. And I think Carl Jung, in the study of psychology and the mind, the ego is a massive part of that. So there's this big central mountain on his face that was saying dialogue with the ego and the understanding of it was a key piece of his life, and it looks like it definitely was. Now, he's also got large ears, big ears. That is a water feature. So the forehead relates to the water element as do the ears. So when we see those large ears, that's about depth, wisdom, philosophy, metaphysics. It's about that deep knowingness and pursuing that which makes life tick, and ourselves. What makes us tick? So with a person with large ears, I always encourage them, you've got to find some water metrics. You have to find that stillness. You got to find meditation. You got to find Tai Chi. You got to find Qigong. You've got to find the soft arts that really create some depth in your life. So he has all the markers for someone who was very water driven. And as he got older, he had a look of wisdom. That's what water is characterized by, that deep knowingness in the face. Sort of, my friend, my buddy, lifelong buddy, Corey Polster, shout out to Corey. He's always said to me, he said to me years back about something, he said, some people have that smile where they smile like they know something that we all don't know. And I always thought that was a really great way to say it. And Carl Jung, as he got older, there's something in there. There's something in the Shen and the way his spirit presents to the face that was like he knew something that maybe we all didn't, or understood something that we all didn't. And that's something to pay attention to. Now, because we're up in that geography still, in this upper portion of the face, his eyes were also kind of on the smaller side, kind of squinty and kind of small. And as he got older, definitely squinty. So he's got an interesting mixture. Typically, when we see smaller eyes, that relates to introversion. And I know from reading about Jung, nothing psychic, nothing predictive, he was very much an introspective person and talked about how the use of words was kind of futile. There was a futility in words because the depth of what he felt and what he saw and what he pondered couldn't really be captured in words. So the small eyes relate to that introspection. Again, someone who is deeply thinking usually and kind of keeps their cards closer to the chest. But with that squinty energy that does this, there's also a scrutiny and an externalization. So when the eyes squint, there's sort of a penetrating energy to the eyes where we look to the outside and we kind of compress to scan our environment and life and to figure out what makes things tick. So very, very interesting in that regard. He's also got a pretty strong chin, also a water feature here. And when we see that wide chin, that points to willpower, the capacity of the kidneys, the energy stored in the kidneys for willpower. And that willpower can relate to a lot of things, but it's how we push, drive, and pursue, and the lasting power. How much will do we have? Having a strong chin is one of the things that's aligned with longevity. The water element is aligned with longevity, but the willpower is one of the key things in the East, they say, that is so critically important for us to live a long time, the will to live. And a lot of times people with water features usually, not always, but they usually have an aptitude in the spiritual, in the metaphysical, oftentimes spiritual based or religious based. And the idea is, they've done studies on this for whatever reason, you can like it or dislike it, but people that usually have a faith or a spiritual orientation to life usually live longer because they plug into a rhythm, whether it's perceived, real or unreal, something larger than themselves, and that gives purpose. So we had this very strong, willful chin, and I think that's really important. Quick little side note too, my martial art background touched on this. In China, there's 3 primary martial arts that people study, the internal martial arts, which are focused on mind, breath, and body connection, using softness instead of brute strength to circumnavigate and to fight and to do those kinds of things. The first martial art you study is something called Xingyi. It's very linear and straightforward, made of a lot of straight lines, and it's all forward moving. Every movement in Xingyi is forward penetrating and attacking. Even if you retreat in Xingyi, you are attacking at the same time as you go backwards. It's all forward moving energy. And the whole purpose of that art is to develop willpower. Xingyi, mind form boxing. That's how it translates. Xingyi Chuan, mind form boxing, the intent of the mind. So they say you have to learn that first so that you have willpower, because the will to live is what helps you live a long time. Then you go to Bagua, which is very circular and round and spiraling and nourishes the joints. And then you move into Tai Chi, which sort of blends the two. And then if you get good at all of those, you go to something called Liahua Bafa, which is 8 methods, 6 harmonies boxing. And I studied that for a while. Fascinating art, by the way. The whole point is that willpower really played, I think, in Carl Jung's life. So he's a fascinating character. If you haven't read about Carl Jung, I strongly encourage it. But in terms of lifestyle guidance, the things that I would say Carl Jung should likely pursue, he was doing. And this is the coolest part about face reading, is that people, maybe Carl Jung looked at face reading, maybe he didn't, maybe he was familiar with physiognomy, maybe he wasn't, who knows. But when you see features and you look at a person's life terrain and you see that they were living the features that they were carrying, this really always points to me the larger design and order of the universe, and how, whether we know it or not, we're being guided, and our features usually point to that in some capacity. And hopefully, by doing face reading, working with me, studying face reading, this dynamic is made a bit better so you can live a longer and healthier life. All right, y'all. Take care.